There is a specific kind of humidity in Austin, Texas, that makes even a $3,000 tuxedo feel like a wet towel wrapped around your neck. But looking at my brother Stellan standing on that stage, you wouldn't know it was 90 degrees at 8 o'clock at night. He looked cool, crisp, and triumphant. The flashbulbs from the local press were popping like fireworks. To his right stood the governor of Texas. To his left were our parents beaming with a pride so intense it actually made my stomach turn. Above them, a massive banner snapped in the warm wind. Helios Energy, powering the Lone Star State. I stood 60 feet away, tucked into the shadow of a VIP tent, holding a plastic cup of warm water. I wasn't on the guest list. I wasn't on the stage. To the 500 investors, politicians, and tech moguls gathered on this manicured lawn, I didn't exist. I was just a guy in a cheap suit who looked vaguely like the CEO, probably a distant cousin looking for a handout. Stellan leaned into the microphone, his voice smooth as silk. "Tonight isn't just about solar panels," he said, flashing that smile that had charmed investors out of millions. "It is about legacy. It is about a family promise kept." My mother wiped a tear from her eye. My father clapped harder than anyone. They truly believed the narrative. They believed that Stellan was the genius, the savior, the golden boy who had tamed the Texas sun. They believed that in exactly 3 minutes, Stellan would pull that oversized ceremonial lever, and the massive grid of panels stretching out into the desert behind us would hum to life, feeding power to 50,000 homes. They were wrong. I looked down at the man standing next to me. He wasn't an investor. He was a Travis County Sheriff's deputy, and he looked bored. "Is it time, Hollis?" the deputy asked quietly. I looked back at the stage, at the family that had erased me. I checked my watch. Almost, I whispered, "Let him finish his speech. I want him to feel like a king right before the lights go out." To understand why I was standing in the shadows with a sheriff's deputy instead of on the podium, you have to understand the fundamental difference between my brother and me. It wasn't just about looks or charm. It was about the definition of work. For Stellan, work was a conversation. It was a concept. It was a whiteboard covered in buzzwords like synergy and paradigm shift. He operated in the clouds. I was the dirt. My name is Hollis. I am a civil engineer specializing in large-scale infrastructure. While Stellan was busy being the president of his fraternity at UT Austin, I was in the library until 2 a.m., memorizing load-bearing coefficients. I studied because I knew that when you build something in the real world, gravity doesn't care how charming you are. If the math is wrong, people die. The dynamic was set before we could even walk. Stellan was the miracle. I was the spare. When Stellan drew a stick figure, my parents framed it. When I fixed the family toaster at age 12, my father just nodded and said, "Good, now go fix the garage door." Helios Energy wasn't Stellan's idea. That's the first lie in the brochure. 5 years ago, I wrote a thesis on utilizing the localized solar intensity of the West Texas scrublands. It was 50 pages of dense analysis on grid connectivity. I left a copy on the kitchen table when I visited my parents. Stellan, who is unemployed and living off our parents' retirement fund, read the title. "This is it," he announced at dinner. "Solar farms, but sexy. We brand it as the future of Texas freedom, energy independence." My father, Mercer, lit up. "That's brilliant, son," he said to Stellan. "You have the vision." I tried to interject. "Actually, the viability depends on the transmission easements. The land rights are a nightmare." "Details, Hollis." My mother, Sloan, waved her hand. "Your brother is talking about the big picture. Support his dream, and that became my life. Support his dream." While Stellan pitched to venture capitalists in air-conditioned boardrooms, I was physically in the desert. West Texas in July is an oven. I spent 18 months living out of a Motel 6, walking fence lines, dodging rattlesnakes, and negotiating with ranchers who greeted me with shotguns. I remember the Phase 1 groundbreaking. We hit a massive snag. The soil stability was worse than anticipated. I spent 3 days awake, re-engineering the foundation plan to save the project from disaster. I was covered in dust, sunburnt, and exhausted. Stellan showed up in a helicopter with investors. He stepped out, wearing pristine aviator sunglasses. "Hollis," he shouted over the machinery. "Looking good. Make sure these guys pick up the pace, yeah? We need visuals for the Q3 deck." He didn't ask about the soil. He clapped me on the shoulder like I was a foreman. Later that night, I drove back to Austin for a strategy meeting. I walked in wearing my work boots, carrying the blueprints that saved the company $1 million. They were already eating dinner. "Oh, Hollis," Mom said, looking at my boots with disgust. "Leave those by the door. We just cleaned the carpets." I walked in. "I fixed the foundation issue. We can proceed." "Great," Dad said, not looking up. "But listen, we've been talking. Stellan thinks Chief Technical Officer sounds too sterile. We want to list you as Head of Operations." "It sounds more hands-on." "That's a demotion," I said flatly. "CTO is an executive. Head of Operations is a manager." Stellan laughed, pouring wine. "Don't be so sensitive. We're family. The equity split is what matters. We're taking care of you." "We're family." That was the phrase they used every time they took something from me. They relied on my silence. They relied on the fact that I was the good son who just wanted the work done right. But there was one thing about being the boots on the ground that they missed. When you are the one walking the land and reading the fine print, you see things the people in the helicopter miss. 3 years ago, during the zoning acquisitions, I found a gap. A critical, beautiful gap. And because Stellan was too busy planning his launch party to read the surveyor's reports, he never saw it. That was the moment the engineers stopped building a power grid and started building a trap. If you looked up Stellan on LinkedIn, his profile didn't list a job title. It just listed a mission statement. Architecting the future of energy. That was Stellan. He was allergic to specifics. He was 32, never held a 9-to-5, yet walked with the confidence of a conqueror. My parents, Mercer and Sloan, were the architects of this delusion. Mercer was a retired oil landman who saw Stellan as his second chance at glory. Sloan viewed Stellan as a fashion accessory. I was just Hollis, the one who fixed her Wi-Fi. The toxicity in Helios Energy peaked when the real money rolled in. We secured Series A funding, $12 million, based on my prototype. Stellan didn't use the money for engineering. He rented a penthouse office and hired a chief of culture. I remember the first board meeting after funding. The room was glass-walled. The investors, venture capitalists from California, stared at their phones. I stood at the front, holding a laser pointer. "If we don't address the heat dispersion issues," I began, "efficiency drops by 40% in the summer. We need to delay the launch by 3 months to recoat the cells." The room went silent. Nobody likes the word delay. Stellan leaned back, spinning a pen. "Hollis, Hollis," he sighed, like he was disappointed in a child. Always the pessimist. "You're looking at the ground. We're looking at the sun." He stood up, physically steering me away from the podium. "Investors," he boomed, "what my brother means is that we have challenges. But great companies don't delay. We don't need to recoat. We just need to adjust the software algorithm. It's a software fix." I froze. "No," I said. "It's physics. You can't code your way out of melting silicon." Stellan laughed. "That's why I'm the CEO. I see the solution. We launch on schedule." The investors nodded. They liked Stellan's answer because it cost $0. They didn't care it was a lie. After the meeting, Mercer pulled me into the hallway. I thought he would reprimand Stellan. Instead, he got in my face. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Mercer hissed. "Stop trying to sabotage your brother. You sound like a mechanic. You need to learn your place. Stellan is the face. You are the hands. The hands do what the head tells them to do." The hands do what the head tells them to do. That was the moment I realized they didn't just undervalue me. They viewed me as a utility. As long as I worked, they ignored me. If I made a noise, they kicked me. But the worst part was the erasure. As we approached the Lone Star Gala, Stellan rewrote history. In interviews, he stopped saying "our team." He started saying "I." I designed the grid. I solved the energy crisis. He was interviewed by Texas Monthly. The headline read, "The Solar King." The cover photo was Stellan in a hard hat he'd never worn. In the 4-page article, my name appeared once. Stellan is supported by his younger brother Hollis, who handles logistics. Logistics. I had written the code base. I had sweat through my shirts in the desert while Stellan was wine tasting. My mother framed the article. Isn't it beautiful? She beamed at Sunday dinner. Maybe if you lose a little weight and buy nicer suits, Hollis, he can find a place for you in the photos next time. But don't be jealous. It's ugly. Jealousy. They always called it jealousy. They couldn't comprehend it was integrity. I wasn't mad he was famous. I was mad he was selling a fraud. But the breaking point wasn't the magazine. It was the paperwork. Because Mercer and Stellan were so convinced of their invincibility, they stopped checking the details. They assumed the rock loyal dog would never bite. They forgot that while Stellan was architecting the future, I was reading the county land records. And that's where I found the leverage that would turn their solar king into a court jester. The end happened with a DocuSign email and a seating chart. It was for the party headed for the Gawler and married for mending days. Stellan was looking out the window. Mercer sat at the head. Our shark of a lawyer, Mr. Gorski, shuffled papers. Sit down, Hollis, Mercer said, avoiding eye contact. Good news and hard news. The good news is TexCore Power, the state's largest utility, is acquiring us. $50 million. We made it. I felt a flicker of relief. That's incredible. Exactly, Stellan turned, smiling without warmth. But there is a catch. TexCore wants a clean cap table. They are uncomfortable with the equity held by non-executive founders. They view your 15% stake as disproportionate for a support role. I frowned. What does that mean? Mr. Gorski slid a thick document across the table. It means, Mercer said, hardening, we are restructuring. Your Class A voting shares are converting to Class C, non-voting and diluted to 0.5%. We are offering a generous severance of $50,000 provided you transition out within 30 days. I stared. It wasn't just greed. It was an eviction. You're firing me, I whispered. 2 days before the launch, we're transitioning you. Sloane spoke from the corner armchair. I hadn't even noticed her. Hollis, sweetie, don't make a scene. You're not a businessman. Stellan needs a team that looks executive. Take the money. Go back to school. I have a master's in engineering, Mom, I said, trembling with rage. Yes, well, she waved. Something less dusty. I looked at the document, the stripping of title, the erasure of ownership, the non-compete. And if I don't sign, Stellan chuckled coldly. Then we trigger the cause clause. Insubordination. We'll fire you with nothing and bury you in legal fees. TexCore has an army of lawyers. You have $3,000. Do the math. He was right. I did the math. I picked up the pen and signed. Smart boy, Mercer exhaled. Now, tonight is the rehearsal dinner. Big stakes. Please, try to look happy for your brother. The rehearsal dinner was a display of excess. I arrived late, wearing my best suit. I scanned the seating chart. Table 1, Stellan, Mercer, Sloane, the governor's rep, TexCore CEO. Table 2, VP of Sales. I found my name. Table 14. Table 14 was by the kitchen doors. My companions were 2 interns and a social media freelancer. I sat there for 2 hours watching waiters pour vintage Cabernet for table 1 while I flagged down a busboy for water. I watched my parents flank glasses with billionaires celebrating the success I built. Mercer stood up for a toast. To my son Stellan, the visionary, you did it all on your own. Nobody gave you anything, applause thundered. Stellan stood, looking humble. Thank you. I couldn't have done it without my team. He thanked the marketing guy. He thanked the PR girl. He thanked our parents. He scanned past table 14 like it was empty space. To the future, Stellan yelled. I didn't stand. I didn't clap. The waiter came to clear my plate. Are you finished, sir? I looked at Stellan hugging the TexCore CEO. Yes, I said. I'm finished. I walked out to my car. Inside the glove box was a brown accordion folder containing the original deed to a 5-acre plot of land. It also contained a freshly stamped court injunction against trespassing. I touched the paper. It felt heavier than the champagne glass I wasn't offered. They wanted me invisible. Tomorrow, at the gala, I would show them exactly what happens when the invisible man decides to be seen. To understand how a billion-dollar deal collapses, you have to understand the geography of power. A solar farm is just a giant battery in the desert. To make money, that electricity must travel to the city through high-voltage transmission lines. Building the farm is easy. The hard part is the interconnection, where your private project hooks into the public grid. 3 years ago, we hit a wall. We needed to run our main transmission cable, the artery of the project, across a 5-acre strip of rocky land known as Parcel 7B. It was owned by Mr. Abernathy, a stubborn rancher who hated Stellan. Stellan tried to offer him stock options. Abernathy spat on Stellan's Porsche. Stellan came back raging. "Root around him!" "We can't," I told him. "North is wetlands, south is a quarry, Parcel 7B is a choke point. If we don't get that land, the solar farm is just expensive art. It won't plug into anything." "I don't care," Stellan yelled. "Handle it, Hollis. Just make it go away. We need cash." "He wants 40,000. Mercer looked up from his ledger. "We are cash poor. We can't cut a check until Series B." "Figure it out. Use your own initiative. Use your own initiative." So, I did. I drove to Abernathy's. I sat on his porch for 3 hours. Eventually, I wrote him a check for $40,000. It was my entire inheritance from my grandmother, my life savings. But here is the detail they missed. Because the company didn't have the cash, I bought the land in my own name. The deed transferred to Hollis Vance, not Helios Energy. I brought the deed to Stellan the next day. Problem solved. I need a formal lease agreement. Stellan waved me off. "Yeah, get Gorski to draw it up later. Right now, focus on the brand launch." Later, months went by. I emailed Gorski. He was prioritizing diligence. A year went by. I brought it up at dinner. "The company still owes me for the land," I said. "And we never signed the lease." Mercer laughed. "Hollis, you own 15% of the company. It's all one pot. When we sell, we'll all be rich. Don't be so transactional." So I let it slide. I believed I was part of the one pot. But yesterday, when they forced me to sign that termination, they changed the pot. They stripped my equity. They fired me. They legally severed me. Mr. Gorski was thorough. He included non-competes and IP clauses. But because he focused on the big assets, he didn't check the land records for the dirt under the towers. He assumed Helios Energy owned the land its grid stood on. He forgot Parcel 7B. When I walked out of that boardroom, I wasn't just an ex-employee. I was a private landowner. And currently, a massive industrial transmission station is sitting on my property without a lease, without an easement, and without permission. In the eyes of Texas law, Helios Energy is a squatter. I drove to the courthouse this morning. I filed an emergency motion for injunctive relief against continued trespass. Since the gala involves activating the grid, sending high voltage through my land, I argued it posed a liability risk. The judge signed the order. It is a kill switch. Made of paper. Stellan thinks he controls the sun. But to get the sun to the customer, he has to cross my dirt, and the toll booth is closed. The countdown was designed to be a spectacle. A massive LED clock, a drone show. The governor stood next to Stellan, hand hovering over the lever. 10, the crowd chanted. I stood by the sound booth with Deputy Miller. He didn't care about drones. He cared about court orders. 9. I watched my parents. Sloan recorded for Instagram. Mercer puffed a cigar. They were so sure the Hollis problem was solved. Eat. 7. I nodded to the sound engineer, Dave. He knew me. He knew I was the only reason payroll cleared in 2022. I gave him the signal, finger across the throat. Dave stepped back from the console. 3, 2, 1. Let there be light, Stellan screamed, pulling the lever. The music swelled. The crowd gasped. And then, nothing. The screens remained black. The floodlights stayed dark. The grid status monitor flashed red. Signal lost. Transmission interrupted. The music cut out. Silence blanketed the lawn. Stellan jiggled the lever. A little suspense, folks. Control, we are dark. I could hear the ops manager in his earpiece. The signal is blocked. The physical relay at Sector 7 is dead. It's a hard cut. Stellan froze. Sector 7. I started walking up the center aisle, the deputy beside me. The gravel crunched loudly. Stellan Vance? The deputy's voice carried like a gunshot. Stellan looked down, pale. Who is this? I'm serving you with an emergency injunction, the deputy said, climbing the stairs. Mercer rushed forward. Hollis, what are you doing? I stood center stage. I looked at Stellan. You didn't read the paperwork, Stellan. What? Stellan hissed. The governor was listening. I pulled the deed. The transmission relay sits on parcel 7B. Helios doesn't own it. I do. Stellan blinked. We paid for it. No, I paid for it. With my own money. I asked for a lease. You said, don't be so transactional. Remember? Stellan turned gray. He remembered. I am the sole owner, I announced, voice rising. Helios has no lease. Your equipment is trespassing. Officer, I request these lines be powered down immediately. The deputy nodded. Mr. Vance, if you override the lockout, you will be in contempt of court. The governor was already backing away. I have another engagement. He walked off without shaking hands. The crowd erupted. Is it true? Sell the stock. Stellan stood there holding the useless lever. Hollis, he stammered. Please, you're killing the deal. I looked at him. I looked at my parents, staring with hatred. I didn't destroy anything, I said. I built the grid. I bought the land. You just stood on top and took credit. But gravity is a bitch. I turned to the deputy. Shutdown confirmed. My work is done. I walked away. Hollis, Sloan screamed. Ungrateful brat, come back here. I didn't stop. Behind me, the backup generators failed. The lights died. The blackout was total. The next morning, Helios Energy stock didn't just drop. It evaporated. I watched it from a coffee shop, sipping a latte. The news showed the governor fleeing and the Chiron solar giant goes dark. My phone had 47 missed calls from Mercer, 100 from Stellan, and 1 from the General Counsel of TexCore Power. I returned the call to TexCore. 3 days later, I agreed to meet my family at their mansion. It felt like a funeral parlor. There were moving boxes everywhere. Stellan looked like a wreck. Mercer was pacing. Sloan was weeping. You came, Stellan croaked. Hollis, thank God, we can fix this. Sign a retroactive lease. We'll pay you double, $2,000 a month. Just save the deal. Mercer tried to look authoritative. We'll reinstate your equity, 15%, a board seat. We made a mistake. Sloan looked up. Please, Hollis, we're family, don't destroy the legacy. I looked at their desperation. They still thought this was a negotiation. I can't sign a lease, I said quietly. Why not? Stellan screamed. Name your price. 20%? I can't sign, I repeated, because I don't own the land anymore. Silence. I had a breakfast meeting with TexCore, I said, pulling a contract from my jacket. They were very interested that their competitor's choke point was unprotected. They realized they didn't need to buy your company for $50 million. They just needed the land to starve you out. I tossed the contract on the table. I sold parcel 7B to TexCore this morning. Stellan's hands trembled. You sold it. TexCore now owns the land and all abandoned fixtures on it. They own your grid connection. How much? Mercer rasped. How much did you sell our future for? The land was appraised at $40,000, I said, but the strategic value, $8.2 million. Sloan gasped. TexCore is disconnecting the Helios feed tomorrow. You have no product. You have massive debt. It's over. Traitor, Mercer roared. I'm just a businessman, Dad, I said coldly. You told me to look at the big picture. The big picture is I held the keys and you treated me like a janitor. So I sold the keys. I turned to leave. Hollis, Sloan shrieked. We have mortgages. You have $8 million. You have to help us. I stopped. I know. If you need help, TexCore is hiring panel cleaners. It's honest work. I walked out. I got into my new Range Rover and drove north. Helios filed for bankruptcy 2 weeks later. Stellan was investigated by the SEC and is now uninsurable. Mercer and Sloan lost the house and moved to a retirement apartment. I took my $8 million to Colorado and started a consulting firm. I work alone. No board. No visionaries. Sometimes I sit on my deck, looking at the mountains, thinking about that moment on stage. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but in Texas, I found revenge is best served by simply turning off the lights.